Chef Diana from Lancaster Local Provisions, and today we're going to be making mushroom farrotto with roasted squash. So, Chef Diana, what is farrotto? Well, it's when you make risotto out of farro. So, I mean, risotto is just a really delicious, cheap meal to create, and you can really zhuzh it up with any ingredients that you add to it. But farro, I love making into risotto because it's this wonderful ancient grain. It has a lot of nutrients in it, and it actually can hold up to being cooked like a risotto. So with risotto, you basically cook rice and you keep adding and adding and adding wonderful yummies that will flavor the rice, and the rice absorbs all that flavor. So to begin, I'm just going to chop an onion. I'm going to put a little bit of my sunflower oil into my pot here. And then I'm going to, so sometimes your onions might look like this. It's okay. You can still eat them. They're not bad. You just want to take the green part out. I'm just going to use one small onion. You don't need too much onion. Now if you see like a green part that looks sort of fibrous, just take it out. You can discard that part. And just chop it into the smallest pieces possible, since this will be part of a rice dish. You don't want big chunks of onion in with everything else that you're making really luscious. Alright. And then what I'm going to do is, once the onions start to become a little translucent, I'm going to add in my farro. We're going to toast it for a couple minutes, and then we're going to start adding in our liquid. Oh, and speaking of liquid, I need to check in on my bone broth. You can use whatever type of broth. You can use a vegetable broth. I'm using chicken broth today. You can use a mushroom broth if you have that. If you have dried mushrooms, it's really great to soak your mushrooms in hot water. And then that liquid can become your mushroom broth. I have my frozen Rooster Street broth here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to heat it up in a separate pan on the stove, so as it's going into the risotto, it's warm, and it will help the rice to absorb the liquid better. I'm going to pour it into my saucepan, and I'm going to put this on the stove and warm it up. All right. Onion's looking good. It's starting to get a little translucent. And now I'm going to measure out my farro. So I'm making farrotto for 4 people. So I'm going to use 2 cups of rice, and then you'll have about a cup of risotto for everybody, and that seems to be enough. So like it'll feed 3 to 4 people depending on how you're cooking it. If this is the only thing that you're going to eat, then I would do a cup of farro per person, or 3/4 cup of farro. I'm going to add in 1 and then 2 cups. You can also use wild rice. You can use risotto rice for this recipe. I just like the nutty flavor that farro has, and it makes a really delicious risotto. So why not give yourself a little more nutrients? So I'm going to let everything sort of toast in here for a couple minutes. I'm going to put a pinch of salt. Very little pinch of salt and a little bit of pepper. And a small glove of oil again. Now, the key when you're making a dish like risotto or soup is you want to season continually throughout the cooking, because when you add pepper at the beginning and you add pepper at the end, the flavors of those 2 pepper additions are going to be very different. So that's why I try to season throughout the dish so you get different levels of flavor from all your different spices. I'm also going to be using our garden citrus blend from Calcutt's Spice Company today, because it has wonderful herbs like rosemary, thyme, it has dried garlic, and coriander, which I love, which is a nice addition. So we're just going to keep letting that sort of toast up. And we have our broth heating up on the stove. I'm going to give it a couple minutes until the pan really gets dry, and then I'm just going to start to add in my broth. Now I just need my ladle for my broth. And all you're going to do is you're going to add in your liquid. And once it's absorbed, then you're just going to add more. Everyone thinks that risotto is this like lengthy recipe that takes forever to cook, and really you can do other things while the risotto is cooking. You don't just like stare over your pot the whole time. So since we're making a mushroom and squash risotto, I'm going to actually bake some of my squash pieces. So this is the Robin's coconut squash. I'm just going to take half of it. I need a spoon to take the insides out. I'm just going to scoop the insides out. And then I'm going to chop it into small pieces. That'll just help me to cook it quicker. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to stir it in at the end of my cook. And it'll be really easy. You can cook it and then puree it and then stir it in, but I like to have pieces and chunks in my risotto, since the risotto or the Farrotto is very smooth already. This is a quart of chicken broth, and I'm probably going to use, depending on how much liquid gets absorbed, I'm probably going to use anywhere from 6 cups to 8 cups of liquid total. So I'm using chicken broth to start with, but then I might add in a little bit of water, and then I'm also going to add in some white wine. You can also substitute in water if you don't want to add wine, or you can really use sherry if that's on hand. Really whatever on hand that will have a nice flavor but won't overpower anything in your dish. So like a red wine for this would not be appropriate. So we don't eat the coconut squash skin. So I'm just going to sort of take that off. You have to get a little creative sometimes when you're cutting squash up. That's why I usually roast my squash in half and then break it down after I've roasted it. But because I want smaller chunks to put into this dish, that's why I'm cutting it down ahead of time, and it will cook a little bit quicker. So that's like a nice little thing. I'm going to make it into smaller chunks. So beautiful. My chicken broth's being absorbed. We're really cooking. So this gives you time. You can make a salad, you can make another side dish, you can make some sort of protein that will be added on top of your farro. You know, it doesn't have to be this labor-intensive dish that you're afraid to create. So I'm going to make these nice sort of somewhat uniform cubes. And they'll be just nice little bites, nice little pillows in the farro. Alright, so I'm going to finish cutting all this stuff, and I'm going to get it on a baking sheet. Alright, so I have my wonderful squash on a baking sheet ready to go in the oven. I preheated the oven to 425. My farro is cooking away, and I'm just slicing my beautiful shiitake mushrooms into nice sort of big chunks. Now, the way to clean a mushroom, don't submerge them unless they're like super dirty, because a mushroom is a sponge and it will just absorb all that water. So you can just cut the tip off, and if you see any dirt, just use a damp towel and you can just wipe it away. Everyone thinks mushrooms are like this dirty thing because they're grown in manure, but they're probably one of the cleanest vegetables you're buying out there. So you see how I'm cutting them into not square chunks, but into these nice sort of mushroom shaped things. So you actually know what you're eating on your plate. So I did double mushrooms in my box this week because I had a lot of greens. So again, you can always customize if you get one of our Market Box subscriptions. So this is about 2 cups of mushroom slices. So I would say it's about 6 ounces of mushrooms. So I'm going to put those on my baking sheet next to my squash. And I'm going to drizzle a little bit of my sunflower oil on both of them. And I'm going to make sure everything's in one layer, because if things are on top of each other, it won't cook very evenly. A little bit of salt on top. Put that oil over everything. And we're going to pop it in there. We're going to check in about 5 to 7 minutes. We might flip everything over. So in the meantime, we're going to be checking in our Farrotto. So let me show you what's going on. This is what it looks like. I still have a little bit of liquid, but I'm going to add some more in. And what's great about using farro for risotto is it's a little bit more forgiving than a risotto rice. Like risotto rice absorbs things so quickly, and then you're like, oh my god, my pan's gonna burn. Or with this, you really can sort of, every 5 minutes, check in on it, stir it, flavor it, and that's what we're gonna do right now. So I'm taking my beautiful garden citrus blend. You can use an herb de Provence, you can just use any of your dried herbs, a little bit of garlic in there too. This does have salt in it, so I am being aware of my salt intake today. I'm going to stir that in, and it smells so good, oh my goodness. So my last bit of broth still isn't absorbed yet, so that's fine. So we're just going to sort of like let that do its thing. Now, the best part about farro is all of the yummies you get to put in it. So you can really, the best thing about risotto is all the yummies that you can put in it. You can really flavor it any way you want. Risotto was one of the first dishes I learned to make when I was a poor art student, and we could really dress it up each week being something different. So today's flavor is coming from the farro, which is nutty. Then we are going to have our caramelized squash, our woody, earthy mushroom, and then I'm going to use my Manchego cheese as my dairy. So usually at the end, once the grain is all nice and like plump with all that delicious cooking liquid, then you add in some dairy at the end to, one, slow down the cooking so your rice or your grain doesn't overcook, and then add some extra flavors. So you could use a goat cheese, but today I really want to use the Manchego. And the Manchego is such a wonderful cheese. It's from DeGlay Farm. We love their cheese so much. We're so obsessed. And you know, it's hard to find a Parmesan that's made in Lancaster County. But this is a Manchego style cheese, so it has that salty, hard element that Parmesan has. So this is what I use instead of Parmesan now. So I'm just going to grate. I think I'm going to be really bold, and I'm just going to use this whole 8-ounce piece because why not, Johnny? Let's just do it. Let's just go for it. Alright, I'm going to add some more cooking liquid to my farro. And I'm adding about a cup at a time of cooking liquid. So I'm going to let this cook, and I'm going to grate my cheese. Alright, so my squash and mushroom should be done. I roasted them for about 12 minutes, and you see they have some really nice color on them. So I'm just going to set them aside for now. You can also whole roast your squash, puree it, and then mix it in at the end with your Farrotto. That's totally fine too. And I want to show you what our Farrotto looks like. It's doubled in size, and it's getting really close to the end. So you can see it's almost twice as big as it was when you saw it last. Now I just finished putting in my whole quart of chicken broth. I'm going to taste it. It's almost there. It's still a little chewy. You don't want it to go too soft. What I'm going to do, I'm going to add in a cup of white wine. I'm using the Waltz Vineyard Apple Crisp, which is delicious. It's not too sweet. And I'm going to start seasoning. It's not seasoned enough when I tasted it, so I'm going to put a nice dose of salt. And again, the cheese I'm putting in is salty, so I'm going to keep that in mind when I'm salting everything. And I'm going to add in a nice helping of my garden citrus blend. You can put your fresh herbs in if you have nice fresh herbs in your kitchen window. Dried herbs are great too, they're totally fine for this. And we're going to just stir this in and hope that it's almost done. The trick with risotto is you want the rice to be sort of al dente, but still pillowy and soft. So you don't want to overcook your grain or your rice so that it's mushy. You want it to have a little bit of bite to it. But, oh, it smells so good. The wine's a wonderful addition, and if you're worried about feeding your kids wine, all of the alcohol is coming out of the pot, so there's not going to be any alcohol left in this dish. You're just going to get the flavor of whatever you're using. I like using a white wine for this. In a pinch I'll use sherry. You can use like a dry vermouth. I wouldn't use a red wine for this. it would just overpower everything that we're trying to build up together. You could even mix in a couple different types of broth, like if you have a mushroom broth and a vegetable broth, or if you have a chicken broth and a mushroom broth, that can make a really nice flavor profile together. I'm going to taste this again. It's almost there. I can taste it. More flavor now. It tastes really good. Gonna add in some more wine. That's about 1.5 cups so far. And we're just gonna let this cook down. All right, so the last bit of wine that I put in there is totally absorbed. I now have my beautiful Farrotto going. I just want to taste it one more time. It's almost cooked. It's perfect. It tastes really good. Yummy. Okay. So I'm going to take it down to a lower, like medium heat. Now, it's so funny. I run a food delivery company, and I somehow am out of butter. So I would normally put like a nice spoonful of butter in at this stage, but I'm going to use my goat cheese, which will be just as delicious and creamy. Now, if you are plant-based, you can use one of our vegan cheeses at this point because they do have a really wonderful melting point. So I'm going to stir in the goat cheese, and that'll get nice and melty. You can also add in cream. Now, why we're adding in dairy is because it's delicious, it adds flavor, but it's also helping to slow down the cooking of the grain so it doesn't overcook. And it's, oh, it smells so good. Okay, it's starting to get really luscious. Okay, so I have a lot of cheese. I have 8 ounces of my Manchego cheese, so I'm going to put most of it in here. I'm going to reserve this portion to sprinkle on top, because who doesn't love cheese on top of things? And I'm going to just stir this cheese in until it melts. Again, you can use a Parmesan, you could even use a ricotta. One of my favorite flavors for Farrotto or risotto is rosemary and cheddar. So if you have a cheddar cheese that you love, we have a great cave-aged cheddar in the marketplace. If you haven't tried it, it's probably the best cheddar cheese I've ever had in my entire life. And I think that's saying something. Alright, so you can see the texture has sort of changed a little bit. It's starting to get coated in that dairy, and it's starting to sort of ooze together, and it's starting to stick together. So that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to pull it off the heat. I'm going to melt all my cheese. I'm going to turn that off. This is looking so good, guys. Okay, I'm going to test it for flavor. You can see it sort of coats the spoon. Definitely salty enough. And a little more pepper. I'm just going to put like a little dash of my garden citrus blend just at the end. This is beautiful. So you can see like this is 2 cups of the farro. This would easily feed 3 people as a main course. If you're a party of 1, you can reuse your risotto the next day. I just heat it up on the stove with a little bit of liquid and a little bit of butter or cheese, and it will just sort of come together beautifully. Italian chefs might say that's a no-no, but who cares? It's delicious. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to spoon out my portion. And you know it's a good risotto when it sort of like settles into the, if you shake it and it moves, that's like what you want. That's the consistency that you want. So then I have my roasted squash and mushrooms, and I'm just going to sort of plate that on top. Again, if you wanted to do a puree of squash or even sweet potato, that would be really delicious. You would add it in at the end, like we just added in the cheese. So you would add in whatever pureed vegetable you want to add in, and then you add in probably a little less cheese than I did. So I'm just going to rearrange my things. But look how beautiful the mushrooms look. They're nice and golden. Our squash is nice and golden too. Beautifully tender. I mean, such a simple meal. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of cheese on top so I can still see my vegetables. And there you go. That's our mushroom Farrotto. with roasted squash and mushrooms. And really, this is such a simple dish. We cooked it in 35 minutes. You can cook other things and you can do other things while you're cooking this risotto. It's not a fussy risotto, but it's still on the stove. So please try this recipe. It's really easy, and happy cooking.